History is often told as the story of heroes, empires, and victories. But buried beneath the dates and monuments are moments so brutal that even the victors preferred silence. The floor ran black with ash for years. That's what the survivors wrote. Entire cities erased. Armies destroyed without battle. Civilians wiped out not by accident, but by design. And this wasn't medieval Europe or the World Wars. This was 2,600 years ago. These are not myths. They were recorded by ancient historians themselves, then quietly pushed aside. History class taught you about Rome's glory, Greece's democracy, Persia's grandeur. But they left out the parts where these empires committed acts so brutal, even their own people called them unforgivable. What you're about to hear is not legend. It is what really happened. 6 massacres, 6 civilizations, and not one of them made it into your textbook. Picture a small island in the Aegean Sea. Melos. Population, maybe 5,000. They wanted one thing: neutrality. When Athens came knocking during the Peloponnesian War, the Melians had a simple answer: we're staying out of this. Athens sent envoys. The conversation that followed would be recorded by the historian Thucydides, and it would chill readers for the next 2,400 years. The Athenians were clear: surrender or die. The Melians appealed to justice, to the gods, to basic human decency. Athens replied with words that would define power politics forever: the strong do what they can, and the weak suffer what they must. The Melians refused. They trusted Sparta would save them. Sparta never came. Athens besieged the island through winter. When the walls finally fell, Athenian soldiers went house to house. Every man of military age was rounded up in the town square. One by one they were executed. The women were dragged to the harbor. The children too. All of them sold into slavery. The island was repopulated with Athenian colonists. Within a generation, nobody spoke the Melian language anymore. The culture vanished. And Athens, the birthplace of democracy, the civilization that gave us philosophy and theater, had just committed genocide over a refusal to pick sides. But here's what makes it darker. Back in Athens, citizens voted on this. Democracy chose massacre. The Lusitanians were fierce. Tribal warriors from what's now Portugal, they'd been fighting Rome for years. Ambushes in the mountains. Hit-and-run raids. Rome couldn't pin them down. So Rome did what Rome did best when war wasn't working. They lied. Servius Sulpicius Galba was the governor. He sent word to the Lusitanian tribes: peace talks. No more bloodshed. Settle your people on Roman land. Farm. Prosper. The tribes were exhausted. They agreed. Thousands arrived at the meeting point, families included. Galba welcomed them. Gave speeches about partnership and Roman generosity. Then he divided them into 3 groups. Easier to process, he said. Easier to give out land assignments. The Lusitanians walked into the separate camps. That's when the Roman legions surrounded them. No trial. No warning. Just swords. They killed every man they could catch. Women and children were sold to slavers before the bodies were even cold. Roman historians later estimated 9,000 dead in a single afternoon. When word reached Rome, the Senate erupted. Cato the Elder called it a disgrace. Galba was put on trial for war crimes. But Galba was rich. He brought his young grandchildren to court, wept in front of the senators, and bought his way to acquittal. One Lusitanian survived that day. His name was Viriathus. He would spend the next decade making Rome bleed for what Galba did. But 9,000 people never got their revenge. Cambyses too was losing his mind. The Persian king had just conquered Egypt, but rebellion was spreading back home. His own brother, or so he thought, had seized the throne. Cambyses marched his army east across the desert to reclaim his empire. But this wasn't a normal desert. This was the Dashti Kavir, the Great Salt Desert, a landscape so hostile that even modern travelers avoid it. Temperatures hit 160 degrees Fahrenheit on the ground. The salt crusts crack under your feet, and beneath them, mud that swallows anything that breaks through. Cambyses' army had no choice. It was the fastest route. They brought water, but not enough. Not for 50,000 men crossing a wasteland where nothing grows. The first week, discipline held. The second week, soldiers started collapsing. By the third week, men were drinking their own urine. Then they started drinking salt water, which only accelerated the dehydration. Ancient historians recorded what happened next. When the food ran out, the army turned on itself. Soldiers drew lots. 1 in 10 was killed and eaten by the others. Officers couldn't stop it because officers were starving too. Most never made it out. The survivors who limped into Persian cities were skeletal, delirious, traumatized beyond recognition. Cambyses himself died shortly after, possibly by his own hand. His empire fractured. And somewhere in that salt desert, beneath centuries of sand and salt, 40,000 Persian soldiers became dust. No monuments. No graves. Just a desert that refuses to give up its dead. The Nabataeans controlled something more valuable than gold in the Arabian desert: water. They knew every hidden spring, every underground cistern, every secret well that kept the trade routes alive. Their caravans moved frankincense and myrrh from Arabia to the Mediterranean, and they grew wealthy beyond measure. Antigonus the One-Eyed wanted that wealth. One of Alexander the Great's former generals, now carving out his own empire, he sent his son Demetrius with 4,000 soldiers to take Petra, the Nabataean capital. The Nabataeans weren't fools. They saw the Greeks coming and evacuated Petra, hiding their people and treasure in the desert canyons. Demetrius arrived to an empty city. No army to fight. No treasure to loot. Just stone facades carved into cliffs. Furious, Demetrius ordered his men to poison the wells around Petra. Every water source they could find got contaminated with dead animals, waste, anything toxic. The Greeks wanted to make the desert uninhabitable. When Nabataean caravans returned from trade runs, they drank from their usual wells. Entire caravans, dozens of people, died within hours. Some sources suggest hundreds perished before the Nabataeans realized what happened. But here's where the story twists. The Nabataeans knew wells the Greeks never found. They survived. And then they hunted down Demetrius' army in the desert at night, killing sentries, stampeding horses, vanishing before dawn. The Greeks retreated in chaos, having gained nothing and lost hundreds. The wells were eventually cleaned. But the Nabataeans never forgot. They stopped trusting outsiders entirely. Petra became more isolated, more paranoid. The price of survival was permanent suspicion. Elam was ancient when Babylon was young. A civilization with its own language, its own gods, its own kings stretching back over 2,000 years. They'd warred with Assyria for generations. Back and forth. Winners and losers. The usual rhythm of empire. Then Ashurbanipal became king of Assyria. And he decided Elam wouldn't just lose this time. It would cease to exist. The Assyrian army swept into Elam with orders that went beyond conquest. Burn everything. Kill everyone. Leave nothing standing. For 2 years, Assyrian soldiers moved through Elamite territory like locusts. Cities were razed to the foundation stones. Temples were demolished. Libraries burned. Canals were destroyed so the land couldn't be farmed. Ashurbanipal's own scribes recorded it with pride. I destroyed the ziggurat of Susa. I smashed its horned copper bulls. I leveled its sacred groves. I carried away their gods. The land of Elam I devastated. For 1 month and 25 days I marched about victoriously in the provinces of Elam. Entire populations were deported. Elamite royalty was dragged to Nineveh in chains and executed publicly. The Elamite language began to die out within a generation because there were so few people left who spoke it. Survivors wrote that the ground stayed black with ash for years. Whether from burning cities or scorched farmland, the records don't say. But Elam never recovered. The civilization that had stood for millennia disappeared from history. Ashurbanipal built a palace with the loot. On its walls, he carved images of Elamite kings kneeling before him. Even in art, he couldn't let them have dignity. Alexander the Great called it liberation. The people of Susa might have called it something else if anyone had asked them. When Alexander's army arrived at Susa, the Persian city surrendered without a fight. The gates opened. The Persian governor welcomed the Greeks as conquerors. This should have been peaceful. It wasn't. Alexander's soldiers had marched for years. They'd fought through Anatolia, Egypt, Mesopotamia. They were owed plunder. Susa's treasury held 50,000 talents of gold and silver, the equivalent of billions in modern currency. But soldiers don't just want bullion. 4 days, Macedonian troops poured through Susa's streets. Homes were ransacked. Anything valuable was seized. Ancient sources are vague about the violence, but reading between the lines makes the picture clear. Soldiers don't spend days looting a city that surrendered without taking liberties with the population. Greek historians later wrote that the palace floors were so covered in debris and blood that the original tile patterns couldn't be seen. The treasury was stripped to the walls. Alexander took the gold to fund his war. His soldiers took everything else. What makes Susa's sack particularly cruel is that it was unnecessary. The city gave up. They could have been allies. Instead, they became a lesson. Surrender means survival, but it doesn't mean safety. Alexander would be dead within 7 years, his empire splintering before his body was cold. But Susa never recovered its former glory. The city that had stood as a Persian capital for centuries became just another looted ruin in Alexander's wake. 6 massacres. 6 civilizations that learned the same lesson. It doesn't matter if you fight or surrender, stay neutral or pick a side. When empires decide you're in the way, history forgets to write down what happened to you. These weren't accidents of war. They were choices. Calculated decisions made by men whose statues we still build, whose names we still teach, whose empires we still admire. Maybe that's the real lesson they don't teach in school. Not that ancient people were more brutal than us, but that we're still choosing which brutality to remember and which to forget.